Well, good evening, Park Plaza. It is certainly a privilege to be with our church family tonight. If you are visiting with us, I just want to just extend a very warm welcome to you and just thank you for coming, and certainly hope that you are able to join us again in the near future. Tonight, we're going to continue our look at getting back to the basics. For the last couple months now, we've focused our Sunday nights to this theme. And just a few short weeks ago, our Central Campus minister, Kevin Peters, spoke his insights and thoughts on the life of Abraham and Isaac. And tonight, we're going to fast forward a few chapters over, and I'd like to share with you some thoughts and insights I have on the life of Jacob. Now, I have an 8-year-old daughter. Most of you know who she is. Her name's Briley. And every Sunday morning after Sunday school, she comes to me very eagerly, wanting to show me her art, wanting to show me her creative design. And she's so excited about that. And we know from a child's perspective that play is the language of a child. And so when she's in Sunday school, she's learning about these biblical lessons, and there's some sort of creative design that helps her apply these lessons, to help her understand what these lessons are about. I too grew up in the church, and I still to this very day can remember different cartoons, different coloring sheets that I used as I was being taught these lessons. And still, being in my 40s, occasionally when a lesson is being presented to me, I still kind of remember. I can go back and pinpoint those different coloring sheets. And it brings about that two-dimension perspective. And so my goal tonight, I really want to kind of step out of that two-dimension perspective and bring a three-dimensional perspective by using the lens of relationship. So as I speak about Jacob tonight, I want you to kind of walk with me, and I want to paint that picture for you of what the story of Jacob looks like from a relational perspective. And to do that, I've used 3 different chapters in Genesis to help me paint this picture. The first chapter, Genesis 25:19, this is where it all began. This is the birth of Jacob and his brother Esau. Verse 19, this is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 people from within you will be separated. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out, and with his hand grasping Esau's heel, they named him Jacob. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So to paint this relational picture, to look at this from a relational perspective, I want to go back to verse 22, where it talks about the babies jostled each other within her. Now, any of you that have boys, you know that there's a competitive nature among those boys. You know that they wrestle with each other. They're just naturally rough. And some of us that may have 2 daughters or a daughter and a son, we can still see that perspective. But yet from the very womb of their mother, they wrestled with each other. I also want to bring to light their earthly names. Esau is suggested to mean robust, complete, a manly man, while Jacob, on the other hand, his name meant he grasps at the heel. Now, my mom is a retired second grade teacher, and I remember years and years ago, after the first day of school, we're at home and we're sharing about the first day. And I noticed my mom, she's just a little off. She's just a little quiet. And when we asked her about her first day, she kind of broke down emotionally. And I can't believe it. I still cannot believe it. I have a child in my class whose first name, his legal first name, is Brat. B-R-A-T, Brat. Now let that sink in for a second. Brat. Everyone calling this child Brat. What are the implications of that? You know, for the first few years of his life, it's just a name like no other. But think about that traumatic moment in which he realizes, wait a minute, my name Brat means troublemaker. My mom named me troublemaker. Everyone I know calls me troublemaker. Think about the trauma and the implication and just the low self-worth, the shame that is born in that individual at that very moment. Now, we have Jacob, and Jacob doesn't quite imply the meaning of brat, but nonetheless, it's the same. It's kind of a lesser than, again, in comparison to his older brother, Esau, robust, complete, manly. Jacob's name means he grasps at the heel. So to really get a visual, to conceptualize that, you know, little 5-year-old Jacob one day realizes, he connects the dots, he realizes what his name means. He grasps at the heel. Now, to grasp at a heel, you've got to get down low. And immediately you're put in a position where everybody above you is looking down at you. And then to grasp at the heel is at the back of the foot. So automatically, no one's facing you. Everybody has their back turned towards you. And if they were to turn around, they're looking down at you. And so there's this connection there. There's this name there that brings about some low self-worth. Let's look at the family dynamics. In verse 28, Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. The Bible does not read that Isaac loved both Jacob and Esau. It says that Isaac loved Esau. He was his favorite. And Rebekah loved Jacob. Now, the roles of a dad. The dad is a model of the family. As sons and daughters, we yearn for our dad's love, affection, approval, and at times discipline. The mom's role of the family is to be supportive, to provide for our basic needs, and to also apply discipline. And yet we have here a family system that is divided. We've got Rebekah and Jacob on one team, and Isaac and Esau on the other. The two are already wrestling among each other, and now the parents are brought in to also compete. And you think about that from a marriage perspective and how that could divide a marriage. Fast forward a couple chapters over in Genesis 27. I don't have the verses 1 through 4 on PowerPoint, so I want to read them out to you here. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could not longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son, here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I am now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your weapons, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country and hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Now Rebekah was listening. And when she heard Isaac speak these things to Esau, she immediately hightailed it over to Jacob and began to transpire, began to manipulate and devise a scheme to trick Isaac in giving Jacob the blessing. Now, with Esau being the firstborn, he automatically got the blessing. And back then, the blessing was double the inheritance. And we already read that Isaac already favored Esau. But Rebekah favored Jacob. And so she was in this to bless Jacob with the blessing. And so the two of them devised a scheme to trick Isaac. Jacob put on some goat skin to represent the hairiness of Esau. Rebekah prepared the meal, and then Jacob also put on Esau's clothes. And then in verse 21 we read, "Then Isaac said to Jacob, 'Come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not.'" Now that verse alone implies the dysfunction of the family. Why is he even questioning that? If he trusts his family, he would not be stating to determine whether or not you're my son Esau. We go on and read, "Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, 'The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau.' He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he proceeded to bless them. 'Are you really my son Esau?' he asked. 'I am,' he replied. Then he said, 'My son, bring me some of your game to eat, so that I may give you my blessing.' Jacob brought it to him, and he ate. And he brought some wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, 'Come here, my son, and kiss me.' So he went to him and kissed him. And when Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, 'Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's riches, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed.'" Again, the dysfunction of the family from a relational perspective. And what's even more devastating is that Jacob became someone he wasn't to gain his dad's love and blessings. He took on another identity. He became someone God did not intend for him to be. And he denied who God created him to be to gain his dad's approval and earthly wealth. The final chapter I want to present to you tonight really is the climax of this whole thing. Genesis 32, and we're going to start in verse 22. And again, all of this relational perspective leads us to this pivotal moment when Jacob wrestles with God. And just the title alone there, we hear that word wrestling over and over. From the time that he was in his mother's womb, he jostled with his brother. He wrestled with his brother. And we just read this account where he wrestled with his dad for his dad's blessing. Oftentimes, our relationship with our dads mirror our relationship with God. And now he is face to face with God and about to go into a wrestling match. Verse 24, "So Jacob was left alone in the dark, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched, and he was wrestled, as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you give me your blessing." The man then asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. The man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Now, again, I want to bring this 3D perspective. I want to bring this relational lens to this biblical account. Going back to verse 24. So Jacob was left alone in the dark and then wrestled with the man till daybreak. What do we know the dark to be? What are those dark times like in our lives? It's those dark seasons. It's those moments of being completely and utterly overwhelmed. And some of those dark times can be very, very traumatic. Now, what do we know about daybreak? It's the light. It's a fresh start. It's a new beginning. Jesus provides that spark. Going on in verse 25, when the man saw that he could not overpower him. This speaks to the willpower of mankind. This speaks to those ungodly beliefs that we hold deep, that are rooted in our heart. And we can't break free from them. We believe in them so much. So God had to reach out and break his hip. And breaking his hip recognizes or resembles in our lives those moments of brokenness. We look at brokenness as being so negative and so hard because it brings about hurt and pain. But really it's in that brokenness where we can break free from the chains and the bonds in our life and begin to see things from a different perspective. And that's exactly what's been taking place right here with Jacob. The man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak. Let me go, for it's time. The light is coming, a fresh start, a new day." But Jacob's will was still holding on. And he replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Then the man asked him, in verse 27, then the man asked him, "What is your name?" I've always found it odd that the question is placed right there at that specific time. I often go camping, hiking, and I can imagine sitting down at a campsite. It's dark. I'm sitting by the campfire. And if someone were to enter into my campsite, my first response is, "Who are you?" And probably he would tell me his name, and I would exchange mine, and we'd sit down and have a great conversation. But going back to the beginning of Jacob wrestling with God, it doesn't say that they had that exchange. It said, so Jacob was left alone, and a man came out of nowhere and immediately started wrestling. And then we get down to verse 27, after God has to break Jacob. And he says, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. And God said, "Oh no, my son. Oh no, my child. You are no longer," he grasps at the heel. "Your name is no longer Jacob. I have a new name for you. Your name is Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans, and you have overcome." The new name for Jacob was the blessing. The blessing was breaking free from the lies and the dysfunction that he held in his heart and coming to know who God created him to be. Now tonight, as I've tried to paint this relational picture of the story of Jacob, you've read with me the words, the verses. And you've kind of walked through with me this cartoon image on the screen above. That two-dimensional world that really doesn't do any justice in painting a picture, a relational picture. So I have a video that I want to play, and it's titled, "I Have a New Name." And when you read these words, I want you to really take them to heart. When you hear this young lady speak, I want you to hear her passion, and I want you to hear the truth.
God spends a lot of time in the Bible telling us who we are. It's almost as if he knew that we would doubt who that was from time to time. It's as if he saw it coming, that we'd spend our whole lives searching for what our identity, what our real name was, and that there'd be many moments in our lives where we'd let different kinds of names define us. When we've looked in the mirror, compared ourselves to pictures, and heard the name ugly. When we've been left by loved ones, people we trusted once, and heard the name unworthy. When we've been drowning in discouragement, living in a seemingly never-ending crisis, and heard the name forgotten. When we've had our hopes up and our hearts open, only to be brought down by closed doors, and we've heard rejected. When we look for infinite affirming love through lesser physical fleshly versions. When we give it away, or when it was stolen, and we hear impure, we hear garbage. When we go to other vices to ease our pain, and we hear addict, we hear forever broken. When we feel like we're living in the shadow of someone else's calling, and we hear second place. When our pain cripples us to a point where we don't even know how to let others in, and we hear lonely. When our past seems too gross for others to forgive, and we hear disgusting. It's overwhelming. These voices we're constantly hearing. It's suffocating. This air of constant critique and comparing, and it's sort of amazing. The people whose voices I've allowed to name me. The power I've given to my past, to my mirror, and to my surroundings, and enabled them to identify me. The amount of years I've spent living up to whatever others say over me. But God says something else about me. It's like he knew there would be other voices, so he wrote his voice down in a timeless book of truths that would remind us over and over again in the moments when lies would block his truths and somehow make us forget. I'm going back to the source, not the people I've allowed to represent God to me, but the actual, literal, tangible words that he has written down for me. And there's some other names he's given to me. John 15:15, he calls me friend. 1 Thessalonians 1:4, he calls me chosen. Ephesians 2:10, he calls me his workmanship. He calls me his art. He calls me handmade. He calls me purposed and fashioned for good things. 1 Corinthians 6:19, he calls my body a temple. He calls it the residence of the Holy Spirit. Acts 1:8, he calls me his messenger to the world. Galatians 3:26, he calls me his child. Romans 5:8, he calls me greatly loved. John 8:36, he calls me free indeed. 2 Corinthians 5:17, he called me brand new. And it's amazing how different these names are from the names I'm used to listening to. And in my journey to discover who I really am, in my battle to uncover the truths of myself, I've learned something new about my name. And now this is what I am certain of. My name is not the name the world calls me. My name is not the name my past called me. My name is not even the name my own mirror calls me. But my name is the name I answer to. And I can choose today, from this moment forward, to answer to a new name. When I hear lonely, that's not me. When I hear disgusting, that's not me. When I hear unworthy, I don't even look over my shoulder. When I hear broken, they must have confused me. Please look elsewhere. When I hear ugly, abandoned, useless, forgotten, I figure someone just has to remind them. Maybe those were my old names, but they're no longer the names that I respond to. My name is the name I've chosen to spend my days living up to. And if these other voices are not saying the same thing that the truth is, I look in my mirror and I repeat this: they have no right to be speaking to you. When you stop answering to your old names, they stop having power over you. The name that my Father, eternity's author, the world's creator has called me are the only names that I answer to. When I hear friend of God, that's my name. God's workmanship, that's my name. Chosen, that's my name. Loved, wanted, created with a purpose, that's my name. God's temple, that's my name. God's messenger, that's my name. Free, that's my name. Child of God, you must be looking for me. Greatly loved, you must be calling for me. Brand new, that is my name. That is the name that I respond to. The enemy has no power here. Perfect love casts down fear, and perfect love has named me and you. What is your new name? What is stirring up inside of you when you hear these words that his word, that the word has proclaimed? What do you know is the name God is calling you? Maybe it's not the name you grew up with. Maybe it's not the name your old friends associate you with. Maybe it's not the name that your whole life you were used to identifying with. But it's the name you now answer to. So when the enemy tries to get to you, it's the name you introduce yourself with. As for me, my name is forgiven. My name is free. My name is brand new. Loved, wanted, child of God, created with a purpose. And it's been a pleasure to meet you.
Tonight, if you hear a name that doesn't come from this book, tonight, if you find yourself over and over in a wrestling match, if you're tired, if you need help finding a new name, we would love to help you with that. Bryson's going to lead us in the song, and if you want to come down, we will pray for you.
Let's stand.